Okay, hi again. So in this video, we're going to go over some of the more advanced responsive image techniques. We were probably already seen some stuff on basics of responsive images, but this is going to be a little more fancy, a little more high-end, a little more luxurious. Well, maybe not luxurious, but we're going to look at a couple of SVG examples. So SVGs are kind of blowing up as far as taking off for doing resolution independent responsive images. Resolution independent meaning doesn't matter how much you scale them, they always look good. So we'll look at some of those examples. We'll talk about switching images based on the device resolution. So say you have a phone that has a higher screen resolution than a desktop, which most of them are. Maybe you want to show a image with more detail in it, more pixels, so that it looks sharper on a smaller device. So if you show a small image on a really high resolution device, the device kind of makes up new pixel, it interpolates it and kind of expands it, and it can look a little soft. So that's one possible use. We'll also talk about switching for viewport sizes. So maybe the browser is bigger or smaller. Maybe you want to switch images for that reason. So we'll look at that. We'll also talk about letting the browser choose for us. What? The browser's in charge now? Not really, but the browser now can make decisions based on, you give it some information like a list of images and how big you think the image is going to look, and it can decide which one to show. Kind of interesting. Takes some of the decision making off you, I guess, but we'll look at that. And then we'll also talk about switching to ArtDirect. ArtDirect meaning maybe you want to show a completely different image depending on a situation. So maybe an image looks good when it's big, but it doesn't look very good when it's small. So because of, things get too small or something. So maybe you want to switch to a new image. So that's called art direction. And we're going to use the picture tag for that one. So before we get to these, let's look at some SVG examples. So you may see maybe a different video on this or some different resources depending on what kind of mood I'm in. No, not really. But you may see some other stuff on SVGs. But just as a kind of a basic primer here. So SVGs are scalable vector graphics. They're sort of like old school Flash files that are mathematical descriptions of shapes instead of describing each pixel. You might do them with Illustrator. They're often flat, or they have flat colors, or they have gradients in them, things like that, and simple shapes. It's not really photography-ish. Is that a word, photography-ish? I don't think so. But the good thing about SVGs is since they are mathematical descriptions or coded images, if you want to think of it that way, is it doesn't matter how big they are. So if this was a bitmap image, like a Photoshop image of this, then Photoshop would have to describe, or a bitmap image has to describe what every pixel looks like. There's a gray pixel, and then a slightly different gray pixel, and then another gray pixel. Each pixel. There's some ways you can compress it and things like that, but basically it's a description of the pixel colors. When you're looking at an SVG file, it's more of a description of the shape. So there's some math or some code that says make this shape, and then there's a little bit of code that says make a gradient from this color to that color, and then so on. So it becomes much smaller. So if you think of a big circle, if it's a circle, if it's a bitmap, it's going to be a lot of pixels to describe. If it's a circle and it's a vector object, then you just say make a circle and make it green or something like that. So it can be a lot smaller. So here we go. We're going to resize this thing, and you can see that it looks fine. Obviously, it looks great, no matter how big it is. You could blow this SVG up to the size of a building, and it would still look crisp and clean around the edges. If this was a bitmap, pixel-based image of this this picture, then if you blew it up to the size of a building, it would look really soft and blurry because it has to make up new pixels to fill in that space. But here it's kind of drawing on the fly because it's coded, right? So this one uses the image tag, which is not much different than using a JPEG or a GIF or something, or a PNG, but you're using an SVG instead. So I'll show you the code here in a second. This one is slightly different. This one is using, let me make this a little smaller so we can see it here. This one, the code for the image is embedded directly in the page, so it's not even a separate file. Let me show you the code. It'll probably make a little more sense. So here we're going to SVG examples, which I probably gave to you because I'm so nice that way. Here's the first one. Here's the image tag, right? Regular old image tag with a source, but the source is an SVG file. So that's it, right? It's not much different than a regular image, but it's a different type of file. It's a vector-based file, which can be resized, and it's tiny too. Actually, I think it's like 4 kilobytes or less. Tiny file. Here's the second one, this pizza thing, which I kind of stole from your book, but don't tell anybody. Here is the tag for this one. It's the SVG tag. There's no image tag. And then if you look, there's a bunch of circle tags in here. And it's basically drawing this image with code. Pretty wild, huh? So since this is embedded in the page, there's no separate file here. So that means this image can be manipulated by JavaScript or CSS. All kinds of interesting things can be done to it. The downside is this is a pretty simple image, right? This pizza thing. But if it was a complicated image, this code could get really long. It would make your file bigger. Another disadvantage would be these types of image files. It's not really an image file, it's code. It's not really cached by the browser or saved. So browsers will save images that you download on a web page because it thinks like, well, maybe they'll want to look at that web page again and I don't have to download that image again. But this kind of image, this is not really an image, right? I mean, it is, but it's not cached the same way. So those are disadvantages. So both these methods have advantages and disadvantages. And there's other ways to embed them too. You can use the embed tag, I think, object tag or something. Yeah, there's a bunch of ways. And so you'll see some more information on that later, but I just wanted to kind of give you a heads up that these SVG things are getting really popular, and part of the reason is because the file size is so small. So this whole switching of files because of the browser or the browser size or the device is not really necessary as much because this file size doesn't change. Using one file instead of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different files. So it gets simpler that way, in some ways anyway. So anyway, there's some SVG examples, and then wanted to show you this page. So maybe you've seen this already, but get back to the basic reasons why we do, or why you want to make decisions about these responsive images, is for these reasons right here mostly. So, and you may have seen this already, but we'll kind of go over it again. So you may think like, do I want to change my image size depending on my responsive design? So maybe an image is full width at one size, and then it's in 2 columns at another size, and then it's at 4 columns at another size. So maybe you want different images for those different situations. So that's a possibility. Maybe you want different images for high DPI screens. So on a phone, like I said, you might want to show like a higher resolution image on a phone because it'll look sharper and cleaner and things like that. Do you even want to serve different types of MIME types or file types to browsers that support them? So there are some newer file formats like WebP and probably some others that are starting to come around. And then what you can do with these techniques is switch depending on if the browser supports them or not. And that way you can save a little file size. So some of these newer file types have smaller file sizes, better compression, for example. Or do I want to completely switch the image? And that's the art direction use case where maybe I want to completely switch the image because an image looks fine when it's big, but if you get it small, the details are too small and you can't really tell what's going on. So maybe I want to use a different version. So we'll look at that also, but that's another reason. So this page that I was just looking at goes through all these different cases and then combines them. And obviously, since there's 4 different things here and you combine them in different ways, I'm not going to lie to you, this can get really complicated. That looks a little less fun than old school sort of image tag with a couple of things in it and you're done, right? Yeah, that's kind of the way it can go sometimes, especially if you want to be efficient and make things look good for everybody in different browsers and all kinds of things like that. So this is a pretty good resource. There's another one here, kind of goes through the same kind of thing, describing what these different options are and how to combine them and things. So it can get a little complicated. And I'll link to these probably on the webpage, and you can check these out when you have time. Right? Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. So I've got this file called Advanced Responsive Images Start. You probably have the same file or something similar anyway. And it's just a file with a bunch of text in it. And we're going to insert images and go through a couple of these different use cases. So before we start to notice I have that good old simple responsive image code in there that says max width 100%. And all that's saying that if we apply that class to one of these images, it will not scale past 100% of the width of its container element, which basically keeps it inside of its container and not kind of bleeding out the side kind of thing. So that's already in there. We can use that if we want. Okay, so I'm going to skip down to the first one. This one is going to be switching based on device resolution. So maybe you have a device that has higher resolution. How do you provide a different file for that one than the default file? So this one we're going to use the, let me get rid of this sidebar here. Oops, there we go. We're going to use the good old image tag. And so I'm going to say image source. And we're going to go with Kilauea. Hopefully these are in here, I think. Yeah. So all these images are already in there. And they're basically the same image, or most of them are anyway, but different sizes. So I'm going to go with the 300 by 200 image. And that's the small. And that's going to be the default. So a lot of these techniques have fallbacks, so that if the browser doesn't get this newer code that we're using here, it will still be able to show an image. You don't want to have a situation where this technique doesn't work and then there's a blank image, right? That's no good. So we don't want that. So I put in the Kilauea Iki 300 by 200 by default. Let me make this a little bit bigger so you guys can see it. And then I'm also going to add a height and a width, which you don't have to for this to work. But this is kind of like showing you that one reason you would use, so the height is 200, the width is 300. This is a technique you could use if you wanted to have the image always show up the same size, and all we're doing is switching the resolution. So it would work without it as well, but it's kind of emphasizing that we're just switching for resolution purposes, not for other purposes. Okay, so I put the height and width in there. Now I'm going to go, and I'm putting in extra line breaks in here so you guys can see a little bit better. But now I'm going to go in with a new attribute called source set. So source set, I think I have it in here. Source set allows the browser to, or it gives the browser a list of images that it can use to sort of show the image. So it's kind of like breaking the image source into a set. Oh, source set makes sense, right? So I'm going to say source set equals, and then I'm going to start with the same image, the default one, and then you just split them up with a comma. So I'm going to put a comma there, and then I'm going to put in the second image, which is the 600 by 400 image. So that's my second choice. And then I put a space in there, and then I say 2x. Sorry, this is not wrapping well. Let me make this even bigger. And then I put 2x, and that is the source set. So this is going to be the default image, which is the small one. But if the device determines that it's high resolution, it kind of figures it out itself. So 2x means it's double resolution, if you want to think of it that way. A lot of phones now are 2x, 3x, even 4x. So anything above 2x, it will show this image instead. That's the idea anyway. And then we still need to put in our alt attribute. So the rest of this is just a regular old image. I'll say alt equals example 1. We probably should put a better alt, but we'll save a little time. And then I'm going to add my responsive class again. So I'm going to say class equals responsive image. I think I spelled that right. No, I didn't. Responsive image, and then I'll close that up. So then as soon as I did that, you see that the small image showed up. So it is showing me the 300 by 200 image here. So I'm going to show you this in, so one thing that's weird about this is when you're testing this stuff, Chrome is a little bit weird trying to test this stuff. It often will show you the higher resolution image if it already downloaded it, meaning that if it downloads a large image version and then you say, I want to see a small one in a certain situation, it might not show it because it rationalizes its thinking, I guess, for us. It thinks like, well, I already downloaded the big one. Why would I download the small one too and show you that? The big one's going to look better. So it's not saving any bandwidth kind of thing. So you might see if you're looking at this in Chrome, which we are, you might see the large image when you're expecting the small one. We're actually seeing the default image. But what I'm going to do is show you this in Firefox for a second. So here it is in Firefox. And for this to work, I can't preview from brackets in Firefox. So I'm going to have to save this file. So I'm going to save it just for this one, and then we'll see it, look at it later. And then I'll refresh in here. So here it is in Firefox. It looks the same. But if I go to the inspect mode, so if I right click on this guy and go to inspect, and now I'm in the inspect mode, right? And now if I click on this responsive design mode button, and now I can see it in the responsive design mode. Up here where it says DPR, if I zoom in there, it says DPR1. I'm still seeing the small image, right? If I switch this to DPR2, whoa, what happened? Now it's showing me the larger image. So I'm telling Firefox to pretend that it has a higher resolution. So DPR2, you can think of it as 2x. And it goes 1, 2, and 3. So 3, I should see the big one, or the bigger one as well. So now I'm seeing the 600 by 400 instead of the 300 by 200. So I'll go back to 2. You can also, again, go over here and pick an actual device. So let's say iPhone 10. In an iPhone 10, this is what that page, let me zoom out, that's going to make you guys seasick. In an iPhone 10, I'm going to see that larger image. Here's an iPad. Here's a Galaxy, they don't have a Galaxy S9. Yeah. So again, you can kind of do that in Firefox, and it works in Chrome as well, but Chrome won't always show you the one you expect, or the one that would show up on the actual device. And again, it's because it's trying to think for us and saying, well, I already have this other image. Why would I do that? So anyway, I wanted to make sure that you guys knew that this might not preview as you expect in Chrome. But we'll go back to Chrome because that's going to give us our live preview anyway. So, all right, so that's the first one. That was it, right? So only thing new here is this source set thing where we give it options, right? So here's the default image. Here's this other image with the 2x. And you can have more than 2. You can have as many as you want. If you want to go crazy, go for it. Okay, let's go to the second one. Oh, let me see. Anything else here? No, that's about it. So this is a hint to the browser. So I do have some notes in here. So this is a hint to the browser. So even on a 3x device, the browser may use the 1x image, perhaps due to poor connectivity. So it doesn't mean you're going to see the one that you kind of picked. The idea is to make the situation fluid and let the browser make some decisions and do the best job it can, if that makes sense. Anyway, so you can check out these notes that I have in here too when you have a free minute. I don't want to read them to you. That'd be kind of weird. Okay, so I'm going to go down to about line 74 for the second example. So this one, we're going to use source set and the sizes attribute to serve different images based on the viewport width. And using a unit called VW, which is not Volkswagen, it's viewport width. I always think of Volkswagen when I see that. So this is more hinting and stuff. So a lot of this stuff is sort of hinting for the browser or the device so that it can make the decision of which image to pick. Kind of interesting, right? So let's go ahead and do another image tag here. So it's going to be image source again. And this time I'm going to start with the 700 default size, 700 by 467, which is a slightly larger size. And then now I'm going to go and add my source set again, so similar to last time. So source set equals, and then in this source set, I'm going to use, I'm going to copy and paste here to save a little bit of time here. So this one, the first one is going to be the 600 by 400 one again. And then this time we're going to use what's called the W descriptor. So after that, I'm going to put a space and put 600W. So what this is, this W descriptor is, it's telling the browser or the device, I keep saying browser and device, but it's kind of the same thing in this case. It's telling the browser the actual width of that image, and so that it kind of knows the size of it. We're not putting height and width on these. So in the old days, remember with an image tag, you would put the height and width so that the browser knew how big of a space to reserve for that image. If not, it would have to download the image and then make space for it. So what would happen is the text wouldn't show up on the page, or the text would show up, and then when the image was downloaded, it would have to move the text because it didn't know how big the image was until it downloaded it. So this is, again, a hint for the browser that says this image is actually 600 pixels wide. So now it knows, like, oh, okay, I know that. So now I can kind of work with that number. We do the same thing as we did before. We put a comma in there and give it more choices. So I'm going to go down below there, and I'm just putting in line breaks here so it's easier to read and actually makes it easier for us to see too on the video. The second one is going to be 700, make sure I get these right, by 467. That's this one. And then the width is going to be 700. We're doing a bunch on this one. Then we're going to do even a larger one. This one is 1000 by 667. Sorry, there's a bunch of images in here. And then the width is 1000. So you can see that I'm just putting in, don't put 10,000. This is the actual width of that image, so I'm just using the same number there. So the browser doesn't care what this says. This is the image source, right? But it does care about this. And then we got one more, gigantic one. This one is 2000 by 1333. And then the width is 2000. And then that's the last one. So no comma after the last one. And then we're going to add the sizes attribute, which we haven't used it either. I'm going to say sizes equals 100 VW Volkswagens. 100 Volkswagens. I'm going to say Volkswagens. I don't care. And then I'm going to add an alt, and I'll come back and tell you what the sizes is in a second. I'm going to add alt equals example 2, and class equals same thing. Class equals responsive image. And I think that is it. So yeah, it showed up there. So there's our newest image, our new image. So right away, you can see that we are not seeing the default image. We are seeing this one. So the browser is deciding that this is the one to show. And I need to go back to this sizes thing. So this sizes equals 100 VW. This is telling the browser that in all situations, this image is going to show up at approximately 100% of the width of the viewport. So the VW unit, the Volkswagen unit, is viewport width. It's not Volkswagen. I should probably not say Volkswagen. It's the viewport width. So it's kind of like a percentage. So this is another hint for the browser that says this is going to be a full width image. It's going to be as wide as the web page. You can put commas in here too to give it different sizes, which we're going to do on the next example, I think. So we are saying for all these different image choices, the image is going to show up at about 100% of the width of our browser, if that makes sense. So since I am at this specific width, I don't know how wide my browser is right now, it decided that the 600 wide one was the best. Now let's see if it actually changes. Oh, it is. Okay. So here is, but now see, as I go back down, it's showing me the medium one. That's what I meant by Chrome, the weirdness with Chrome. So since it downloaded the medium one, and then I resized back down, Chrome says, well, I already downloaded this big one, I'll show you that. So as I go up, it'll kind of keep going. So here's medium, here's extra large. So there's the extra large version at 2000 by 133. But now as I go back down, it doesn't change anymore because the Chrome decides to keep it. If I look at this in, let me save this file again. I'm going to save it just to show you this one more time, how it's different. And I'm going to go back to here, and I've got to make a new browser window here. So here's our same page in Firefox. It will switch depending on, it's just a different implementation. So here I am really wide, it's showing extra large, right? And then if I go smaller, it's showing me the medium version. Now it's showing me the small version. Now it's showing me the smallest, the 600 by 400. So anyway, that's how it looks different. So yeah, got to deal with that. But for a device, it's going to show it one size probably. Okay, so let's go back here. So that's it for that one. I think that's good. Yeah. Okay, so scoot down to the next one. This one is inside of a div because we're going to have the browser decide whether it shows us one image or two, kind of using that VW, the viewport width thing again. So I think, yeah, let's just type it in. Well, yeah, let's type it in. I was going to copy and paste, but we'll probably mess it up if I did. I will mess it up. You won't mess it up. So the default here is the 300 by 200. And that's the image source there. And then we're going to go to source set again. And we're going to start with a 300. This is kind of a little bit longer. Sorry about that. We're going to start with a 300 by 200. And then we're going to put in a space and then 300W. That's our W descriptor. Again, that's just telling the browser about how big that image will show up on screen. And then I can copy and paste this. Below that, the second version is going to be 600, the 600 by 400 one. And the width is 600. And then, so we're only doing those two, so we don't need this comma, and that's the end of the source set. Now we're going to do sizes again. But this time we can add in a media query. So I'm going to say sizes and then in parentheses max width 500 pixels. And then a space, and then 100 VW. And then I'm going to put a comma, and then 45 VW. Like so. And then we'll put on our alt, and I'll come back to that in a second. I'm going to say alt equals. And then example 4 or 3, right? Example 3. Okay, I think that is it. We're going to copy and paste this twice. Let me check this real quick. Yeah, I think that looks right. So this time we're going to copy and paste that whole thing, that whole image, because there's going to be two images here. And then I'll talk about what's going on here. So now I've got the same thing twice. So the thing that's new is this media query here. So with the sizes attribute here, you can put media queries in it. So this says at up to 550 pixels wide for our browser, we want the image to show up at 100% of the width of our viewport. If not, we want it to show up at about 45. And I kind of had to work this out to get it to work right. But what this is saying is above 550 pixels wide, we're going to get two images because it's only going to be 45% approximately wide, and another one's going to be 45%. We're using the same image twice, but this is an example of how maybe you could have images that would stack up next to each other when it's wider, or or stack on top of each other when you're narrower. So again, let me do that again because it's confusing. So we're saying up to 550 pixels wide, we want the width of that image to be full width. If not, then we want it to be a little less than half. And I made it a little less than half because it was doing some weird things. So again, you kind of had to play with this a little bit. And then I've got the same image in there twice. So this should probably be example 4 because we want a different alt. Doesn't really matter, but. All right, so let's see what happens with this guy here. I think this is right. So where is my preview? Here's my preview. So right now we're seeing two images, right? We're seeing, am I looking at the right one? Yeah. So here we're seeing the 600 by 400, which is this big one, twice. If I get wider, let's see what happens. Okay, so now I'm seeing them side by side. So this is kind of like doing some responsive design right inside the image tag. It's saying that up to 550 pixels, we want it to be 100% of the width, which is like that, right? It's 100% of the width. If we get above that, it's going to go to 600. It's going to go to 45% of the width, so we get 2 images in there. Now again, Chrome is doing our thing again, where it already downloaded the largest image, so it's not switching sources. It is switching the sizes, but it's not switching the sources. If I look at this in Firefox, I'll save it again and go to Firefox here. Sorry, getting tedious here. So here's our 2 images, right? As I get smaller, if this works, it should switch. Aha, look at that. So here it's 600 by 400. Now Firefox is going, well, now we can use the 300 by 200 image. It's going to look okay. And then because, you know, it's deciding for us. And then as we go down, it'll switch back, I think. Yeah, so it switched back to the large image because now it's wider. So here it's wider, right? But then when we go to the 2 column, it's going to get narrower again. And it decides, oh, I can use the 300 by 200 for a while. And then I'll get bigger again, and it switches back to the large image. So the browser is deciding which version to use depending on how big it shows up on screen and things like that. So again, you're not seeing that really in Chrome as much because they have implemented it differently. And the reasoning again is, well, I've already downloaded the largest image. Why would I download another version? So that's the idea. So you are going to see different results probably in different browsers. But anyway, that worked. Cool. All right. So let's go down to the last example. And this one using the picture tag. So just go down to where it says picture tag here. And go ahead and put in the picture tag. That makes sense, right? And the picture tag, you can kind of think of it as just a container for multiple source elements and source sets and things like that. So inside the picture tag, we can use the source tag. So I'm going to put in source, if I can spell it. And I'm going to also put a media query in this one. So we're basically going to change the image depending on our situation. So I'm putting in a media query, and I'm going to say max width 600 pixels. And this needs to be in parentheses. I don't know why that didn't put them in for me. All right, so media equals max width 600, and then we're gonna say source set. Source set equals, and then we're gonna use, this is a different image, it's beach. It's not showing me all the images, is it? I guess it's not gonna give me a pop-up. It's beach 1_small_600 by 400.jpg. And I think that is right. Make that a little wider again for you guys to see if we can get one line. Whoa, where'd it go? No, it's not gonna fit. There we go. Trying to make it easier for you guys to read. So we've got a source tag, and then we've got a media query. This says up to a maximum width of 600 pixels wide, show us this beach 1 small 600 by 400. So I'm going to copy that and paste. And this one we're going to do min width of 600, and we're going to switch to beach 1 large. I could spell large. And this one is 1000, I think, by 600. And then we still have to add the image tag. This again is kind of a fallback. This one won't even show up, I don't think, unless you put the image tag in. It's not just a fallback. And then we're going to use the beach 1 small as the default. And then we'll say alt equals example 5. Are we on 5? I can't hear you guys. What's going on? I think it's 5. and class. This we're going to use the responsive again. Class equals responsive. Yeah, responsive image. Yeesh. See, I'm losing it here on the typing here at the end. That's wrong. There we go. Responsive image, and I think that is the end of that. And then I think that's right. So let me make sure that's right. So here's our picture tag. Here's our first source tag. This means up to 600 pixels. We're going to use the small image called 600 by 400. Over 600, so I put min width instead. Over 600, I'm going to use the large image that's 100 by 600. And if you roll over here, you can see the two images. And then here's our default image, which is the smaller one. And that's all there is to it, I think. So let's take a look at it. This one will work in Chrome correctly, I believe. So here we go. So if I go above 600 pixels wide, I see the large image, right? Kids on the beach, Hawaii, woo, big fun, right? And then if I make it smaller, as soon as I get to the 600 pixels, I see the smaller image, which is 600 by 400. But this is the art direction part, right? So this image, if we made it really small, you can't see the kids very well because they're small in the frame, right? So this is cropped differently. If we look at this image, it's cropped around only the one kid. So it looks good when it's small, right? If the other one was real small, the kids would be like this big, tiny little kid. You wouldn't be able to see them very well. So that's called art direction. So we're switching that. You can also use the picture tag. I got notes in here for that. To also switch between file formats like WebP and things like that. So you can use it for that as well. So it has multiple uses as well. So there are literally probably hundreds, thousands of combinations of these things, and there are even more. But that's just a little taste of how you can do some responsive images, switching based on resolution, switching based on the size of the viewport. Well, not on that one because it's Chrome. Switching, letting the browser decide how many to display, and switching sizes. Let's look over here. I'm going to save this thing. Tired of the Chrome being so uppity. Switching based on which one fits the best and letting the browser decide, or switching based on whatever you want. Art direction, maybe you want to show a different image at a different size. So anyway, that's about that. So there's a lot more to that. It's a big category of information, but hopefully that helped a little bit, and I'll talk to you again next time. Okay, yeah, bonus content. Well, I just wanted to show you how on this iPhone, so here's the picture example we looked at last, right? So it's 600 by 400, but if I turn the phone to landscape, it's showing the larger image. So it's actually adjusting for landscape and portrait, which is another thing you can do with media queries, but this is just doing it because the resolution is changing. The horizontal resolution is changing, so sorry, that's probably flipping back and forth in your video, but I have to turn the phone to show you. But anyway, I wanted to show you that. Pretty cool, right? All right, this is the real end of the video. Sorry about that.